Today we're out here near Nashville taking a look at the all-new 2019 Lexus ES 350. Back in 1989, the Lexus ES and the Lexus LS were the two vehicles that kick-started the brand. But the Lexus ES has always been a different kind of luxury vehicle. This has always been a front-wheel drive vehicle that's prioritized reliability, interior space, and value a little bit over performance when compared to something like a BMW 3 Series or Mercedes-Benz C-Class. And that's why the Lexus ES has continually been one of the best-selling luxury cars in America and actually the best-selling Lexus sedan, period. Key reasons you'd want to buy the Lexus ES over something similarly priced from one of the European competitors is that we get a considerable amount more interior room. This actually has about 4 inches more rear legroom than a Mercedes-Benz E-Class, even though this is about the same size as that Mercedes, and that is considerably more than you'll find in a C-Class or a 3 Series. The other reason, of course, is that we have front seats that are more comfortable for taller drivers, especially in this redesigned front seat. The seat bottom cushion extension goes really far out, making it much more comfortable for those folks to sit in there. The other reason you'd want one is so you could put a child seat in the back seat, because getting a rear-facing child seat in the back of a compact European luxury sedan is pretty tricky, but it's actually pretty easy in the Lexus ES. Like the very first ES, this generation looks an awful lot like the Lexus LS, and that was definitely deliberate. We have the corporate spindle grille going on right here, and instead of horizontal slats like we find in some Lexus models, we have these vertical kinks. There is, of course, an F Sport model, the first time they've applied that trim package to the Lexus ES, and that gets a grille with squiggles up front, again, very much like the Lexus LS. All models get full LED headlamps, but the LED headlamps do change based on the trim. We're driving the top-end trim, so we have this tri-LED module. In addition to having 3 modules instead of the 1 module that we see in the lower-end trims, these swivel into the corners to give you better nighttime vision. The one thing you won't find up front, however, are fog lamps. You won't find those on any trim, although we do have well-integrated parking sensors. Behind the large Lexus logo, we find a standard radar sensor, and behind the windshield, we find a standard camera, because this does have the latest Lexus TSS 2.0 safety system on all trims. That's quite unique in the luxury segment, because other luxury companies have been focusing on safety, but not very many luxury companies are making all of these safety gadgets and goodies standard in every trim, including radar adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, automatic high beams, oncoming vehicle detection, pedestrian detection, bicyclist detection, and of course expanded operation of all of those systems in low light situations versus the last generation TSS system. As I said just a moment ago, one of the reasons you'd want to buy the ES is because of its child seat friendliness. That's all due to the amount of legroom we get inside this cabin, 4 inches more than an E-Class, even though this is only about 2 inches longer than a Mercedes E-Class. That is because of the front-wheel drive layout of the Lexus ES. At 195.9 inches long, this is significantly longer than a Volvo S60, a BMW 3 Series, or Mercedes-Benz C-Class, even though price-wise, the Lexus ES is actually in that category, not in the category with the 5 Series or the E-Class. Again, that speaks to the value proposition that we find and have always found in the Lexus ES. Versus the last generation model, this is 2.8 inches longer, and a lot of that goes into the wheelbase, which is what helps give us that large rear passenger compartment. Now, it is important to know that the overall profile of the Lexus ES has become a lot swoopier right here over time, and that means that rear seat headroom is a little bit limited for a large vehicle like this. So my head does touch the ceiling sitting in the back seat, but there is a generous amount of legroom, and legroom is what leads to that child friendliness. Now the front seat is quite different, as we'll talk about in a bit. We get a lot more headroom up front, and this front seat is definitely designed for taller drivers. The rear end design of the ES has become more expressive in this generation. We have integrated exhaust tips down low on the bumper. If you get the hybrid model, which we have a separate video on, then we don't get visible exhaust tips. They're tucked up under the bumper. Tail lamp modules remain basically the same across the trim lineup. These are full LED modules, so we have LED turn signals, LED backup lights, LED brake lights, etc. They're large, and they do extend quite far onto the body, as you can see right there. The model that we're looking at does not have the trunk spoiler, but one is available. There are a few things that you will not find under the hood of the Lexus ES. We don't have a turbocharged engine, we don't have a dual clutch transmission, we don't have all-wheel drive, and we don't have an engine tuned for premium unleaded. All of those choices speak to the average shopper's desires in this particular segment, and of course, Lexus's dedication to reliability and dependability. Instead, we have a 3.5-liter naturally aspirated V6 that produces 302 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission, sending power right here to the front wheels. And again, this engine operates on regular unleaded, not premium unleaded like most of the European competition. Fuel economy should average 25 to 26 miles per gallon depending on the trim level that you get. But if that's not high enough for you, there is of course an available hybrid system that gives you 215 horsepower and 44 miles per gallon combined. The only disappointment under this hood for me is the lack of all-wheel drive. I really wish that Lexus had decided to incorporate that in this generation of the Lexus ES. Lexus has told us that they have heard customer feedback on this and they are looking into all-wheel drive, but they have not said whether this platform is capable of supporting all-wheel drive without significant changes or a significant redesign. So we don't know whether there'll be a possibility of an all-wheel drive one in the next few years or whether we're going to have to wait until the 8th generation Lexus ES if they do decide to put that under the hood. So if you live in a snowy area and you really want all-wheel drive, then your options are going to be limited in the segment that the ES plays in. But of course, segmentation is a little bit tricky. I'm going to give these front seats 9 out of 10 points. We are in the model with the extending thigh cushion. We also have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support right there, and of course a powered tilt telescopic steering column that is memory linked. It is worth noting that the passenger seat in this vehicle does not have the same range of motion as the driver. It only gets a 2-way adjustable lumbar support and it doesn't have the extending thigh cushion. That's why this does not get 10 out of 10 points for me. In many of the European alternatives to the Lexus ES, we do find power passenger seats that have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. However, if you're a taller person, you will probably really like this driver's seat because this extending thigh cushion goes really far out. Most vehicles that include a thigh cushion extension, I set it all the way out and that's just about good for me. However, with this Lexus ES, I actually find that that's a little bit too far out. So I do have to tuck it in, perhaps about half an inch or so. So if you're a taller person looking for a little bit of extra thigh support, this actually might be a good option for you. Headroom is quite generous in the model that we're driving. I have about an inch left, and I prefer to sit fairly upright. Thanks to the front-wheel drive layout of the ES, we have more than 81 inches of combined legroom in this vehicle. This front seat's adjusted for me very comfortably. You can see I have an enormous amount of legroom left. And that's even if I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle where this front seat is further back in its tracks, suitable for a taller driver. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that we don't see a lot of back here is headroom. If I try and sit upright, my head is touching the ceiling. Now, we find a little bit less headroom in the hybrid model. I do have to cock my head to one side back there because the battery for that hybrid is located under the seat. Even though headroom back here is a little bit lower than I would like, this is notably above the compact European entries. And the extra legroom means that this is going to be a great deal more child seat friendly, because I suspect that you would actually be able to fit a rear-facing child seat behind me as the driver at 6 feet tall, comfortably and safely back here. And that's just not something you can do in the smaller European cars. There's just not enough legroom. Combined legroom is one of the critical factors that you should look at if you are concerned about fitting a rear-facing child seat in a modern vehicle. The more combined legroom, which is front row plus second row, that you have, the more likely you are to be able to fit a child seat in that rear-facing position. And of course, since we're driving the top end trim, we also have some nice touches back here, like these manual window shades on the rear windows. One of the advantages to a front-wheel drive layout like this over a rear-wheel drive layout like we commonly see from Europe is overall packaging efficiency, and that's interior room for the exterior size of the vehicle. And that's why we find an enormous trunk back here, just under 17 cubic feet. In terms of overall comparisons, this trunk is larger than the full-size Jaguar XJ and really not very much smaller than the BMW 7 Series. It also is very comparable to a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Definitely larger than the average compact European luxury sedan in America, like a 3 Series or a C-Class. It's especially noticeable when you take a look at the height of the cargo area. Now, I can't close the lid with this 22-inch roller bag in this position, but you can see it actually is pretty close. And I would have no problem lining up 24-inch roller bags in this position. This is a very large and accommodating trunk. Now, the trunk hinges do take up some of this room, and I think that's a bummer. I wish they'd given us hidden hinges like we do find in some of the European entries, but this is still very large and very practical. It's also a little bit wider than the previous model year because they've actually made the overall Lexus ES wider this year. It's about 1.8 inches wider or so. The interior that we're looking at right now is the top-end ultra luxury model, and we do have that optional panoramic moonroof right there. that does cut down on headroom just a little bit inside the cabin. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The front seats feature perforated leather because these seats are both heated and ventilated. You can see that we have a style that kind of mimics what's going on in the new Lexus LS, although these seats are not quite as adjustable. The soft touch materials continue on over to the door, where we find a soft touch armrest, soft touch upper section of the door, some real wood trim up there, ambient accent lighting at night that will light up. Of course, the model that we're driving has the optional Mark Levinson sound system. The up-level sound system has kind of an interesting texture on the grille, and then to the right of that you can see that we have some stitched treatment on the door. Now the stitching is not actually holding the door panel together, but it is real thread that is then stitched into that soft touch component. Lower on the doors we do find hard plastics, just as you find in most of the compact luxury cars in America. As we move from the door on over to the dashboard, that same sort of styling continues, where we find that real wood strip that runs across the top, some soft touch plastics after stitching right there, and a soft touch lower section of the dashboard. And as we move all the way to the center, we find the biggest change in this interior, and that is we finally have a Lexus in the United States that has Apple CarPlay integrated into this very large panoramic infotainment system. Now this is not a touchscreen, so you still use the same Lexus remote touch controller that we've seen in other Lexus models to interact with the system, but it actually finally has this particular feature. Of course, we also have factory navigation if you'd rather navigate that way, and of course the typical interfaces for interacting with your media if you'd rather not use Apple CarPlay. We have two large air vents below that, hazard light button, the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system here with digital readouts on each side, power, volume, and tune knob. Working our way down the center console, we find the controls for the heated and ventilated seats, as well as the heated steering wheel right there in the middle. And then we find a slot where you can store your smartphone right there. Now it is just a little bit too small for my iPhone 7 Plus and this case, so it kind of takes some of that cup holder with it if you remove it. You can remove that insert if you want that cup holder to be a little bit more square. Behind this pretty traditional console shifter, we find two USB inputs and an auxiliary input, and that is the only USB input that works with that infotainment system. We have those two right there, but nothing is tucked away out of sight, and you can't, of course, close that lid when those are plugged in. We have a pretty traditional console shifter. Again, drive us all the way back. Sport mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. Behind that shifter, we find the auto brake hold button. Simply engage that and it will keep the pressure on the brakes so you don't have to have your foot on the pedal. And then to the right of that, we have the Lexus remote touch controller. This is actually one of my least favorite input methods for a modern infotainment system. This operates basically the same as the trackpad on a modern laptop. You wiggle your finger around like this and it moves a cursor or the selection icon around the screen. It works basically the same way whether you're in Apple CarPlay or whether you're in the native menus. It does offer haptic feedback. It actually taps just like you'd see on a smartphone or a tablet, but it seems like it takes a little bit more time off the road than some of those click wheel designs with which this competes. We have a little wrist rest back there, and of course direct access buttons to the map menu back, and a little pop-up menu there on the screen, depending on what context you're in. To the left of that, we find the other cup holder in the car. It's a large cup holder, and it does have a retractable level right there, so that way you can put shorter drinks in that cup holder more easily. Between the front seats, we have a leather armrest. It opens sideways. Either side can open that armrest. And inside, we do find a fairly large storage compartment because, of course, there's no drive shaft under there, so that gives us a little bit more room. We have a 12-volt power port where you can see they've plugged in a phone to interact with that infotainment system. In addition to Apple CarPlay integration, we have our typical suite of Lexus integrated apps. These are actually running on the system itself, as well as the Lexus Plus Alexa system that will require a paired Android smartphone for the moment, but we are told that it will support Apple iOS devices for Amazon Alexa coming later in the year. Now, one thing at the moment you won't find in this system, however, is Android Auto support. For some reason, Lexus does not have that, and they haven't really said whether that's coming in the future via an upgrade, but they say they are looking into it. The instrument cluster combines an 8-inch LCD that you can see over here on the left and some small physical dials over here on the right. The tachometer that you see in the middle is part of that large LCD. It changes a little bit based on the drive mode that you're in, so if we go to Sport, or normal, or eco mode, it does change a little bit there. And then on the left side is where we find our typical trip computer information. If you get the F Sport trim of the ES, then we get a slight tweak to this where we have a bezel that actually moves side to side like we see in other F Sport vehicles. The overall theme of the steering wheel is very similar to the Lexus LS. We no longer have cruise control buttons on a stalk. Instead, they're over here on the right side of the steering wheel. This is where you'll find the lane keep assist button, distance control right there, mode, and track forward backward for the infotainment system. On the left side of the wheel, we have the other buttons for the infotainment system, volume up, down, voice command button right there, and a phone button. The rest of the buttons work with that multifunction instrument cluster right there behind the steering wheel. This is a 3-spoke model with aggressive sport grips up top. We have wood inlays right here up top and on the bottom, and then shift paddles behind. We have down on the left and up over there on the right. It's a little bit difficult to see, but the ES also includes Lexus's latest heads-up display. This is not quite as large as what we see in the Lexus LS, but obviously the software is very similar. We have a tachometer, turn-by-turn navigation directions, speedometer, etc., as well as speed limit information. Lexus tells us that this is size-wise one of the largest displays in this segment. It's a little hard to see on camera, but some of the surfaces inside this cabin have an extra amount of texturing. So your eyes are not deceiving you. When you're looking at these door panels, these are actually slight ridges in the material that is covering this soft touch armrest. This is meant to look more like real wood trim than a traditional door covering. It goes with the real wood trim that we do find higher up on the door. We also find similar texturing going on a lot of the plastic surfaces, like the plastic area right there around the window switch, and the panel that contains some of the radio and climate control buttons, especially over here on the left side right by the driver. The first thing you'll notice out on the road is that we definitely get a great deal of front wheel peel with the ES350, and that's because we have over 300 horsepower just on the front wheels. 0 to 60 happened in our tests in 6.5 seconds if the vehicle was able to find enough traction. Otherwise, it ends up a little bit longer, obviously. The lack of all-wheel drive availability in the ES really is this vehicle's only dynamic handicap. All-wheel drive would help improve acceleration figures in this vehicle, most likely because we have, again, more power than those front wheels can handle under all situations. And of course, it would allow the vehicle to direct some power to the rear axle. That would help reduce torque steer, although it is actually very well controlled for a front-wheel drive vehicle like this. You actually get a little bit more torque steer in some of the European front-wheel drive entries, most notably the current generation S60 T6 front-wheel drive model. That one definitely does have more torque steer than what we're finding here. 6.5 seconds is a fairly respectable 0 to 60 time, but you will actually go faster 0 to 60 in certain versions of the Acura TLX. And that's because that 9-speed automatic transmission that it gets has a very, very aggressive first gear, and that really helps improve especially 0 to 30 times. Of course, the downside to that 9-speed automatic transmission is that it is just not as smooth as the 8-speed that we find under this hood, because this is actually the same basic 8-speed automatic transmission that we also see in Volvo's product lineup, the BMW X1, X2, and a variety of other Volkswagen and Audi Group vehicles. That's because Aisin makes this transmission, and Aisin is the largest transmission manufacturer in the world. They make transmissions for any company that wants one. We see this transmission doing duty under the hood of other luxury vehicles. There are a wide variety of different vehicles that you could compare the Lexus ES to, so handling scores are a little bit tricky to talk about. If you were to compare this to front-wheel drive versions of the Lincoln MKZ, the Buick Regal, the Acura TLX, or the Kia Cadenza, then I would say this gets an A overall. Handling is definitely good for a front-wheel drive vehicle. We are driving the top-end model, of course, with the widest tires available, but this really does very well when it comes to a winding mountain road like this. The grip is good, the feel is good around the corners. We get just a hint of feedback from the steering column, and that's not something we get in all of those alternatives. Lexus really has done their best to try and improve some of that driving feedback from the front tires. And of course, we get a lot of power, so it is a reasonable amount of fun. But things start falling apart a little bit if you were to compare this to the all-wheel drive competition. For instance, the all-wheel drive Buick Regal or the all-wheel drive Lincoln MKZ. Those will handle better than this, especially in situations where sending power to the rear will help improve handling. And then of course we have the Acura TLX, which has the super handling all-wheel drive system, and that will actually send the majority of the engine power to the rear axle under limited situations, not all the time, mind you. And then of course we get a third category of vehicle, which would be the rear-wheel drive European competition, whether that's a BMW 3 Series or an Alfa Romeo Stelvio or a Mercedes-Benz C-Class, all of which you could compare to the Lexus ES because they're about the same price. However, you should know that if sporty driving really is your mission, then even the F-Sport version of the ES350 is not going to handle as well as the sporty versions of the BMW, the Mercedes, the Audi, etc. Lexus in general, and the ES particularly, have been known for a supple, compliant highway ride, and that continues even in this version. Although we now have the addition of that F Sport trim, which does trade ride quality for handling ability. We get a little bit more body roll in this version than in the F Sport, but it's still very well controlled. The model that we're driving does not have the available Lexus adaptive variable suspension system. That suspension can firm things up to give you a sportier driving dynamic, or it can also soften the effective damping ratio in the vehicle in order to give you a more compliant ride out on the highway. It does get just a hair floatier than what we're driving right here, although I still think it's a very good balance. This is the kind of vehicle that is definitely tuned for a soft highway ride for a very comfortable long-distance travel experience. But Lexus has put a reasonable amount of effort into making sure that this vehicle is still fun to drive when the road starts to bend. This is obviously not going to be quite as fun as some of those European entries, but remember, this is considerably larger. Again, this is about the same size as an E-Class or a 5 Series for the price of those smaller options. My cabin noise estimate for this ultra luxury trim is 68.5 decibels. I expect this is going to be just a hair louder than the Lexus LS, but it is actually one of the quietest vehicles that we've tested. The ultra luxury trim of the ES also gets some additional sound deadening measures, and we definitely see reduced road noise, especially in this model versus the rest of the ES lineup. We do get a little bit more engine noise into the cabin than in some of the alternatives, but I think it's actually a pretty acceptable V6 growl. Now, it's worth noting that under acceleration, this is actually quieter than the hybrid trim of the ES. We definitely get more of that 4-cylinder engine noise into the cabin in the hybrid version. It's a little bit difficult to talk about fuel economy because we haven't been driving this on our own home turf, but we've been averaging about 24 miles per gallon, which is definitely in the range that Lexus says we should get. I expect this to get a little bit higher than that if your commute focuses more heavily on highway travel than mine does, and definitely lower if it does not, because we don't have a start-stop system in this vehicle. So we're not going to get that extra bump in city fuel economy that you would see in some of the competition that has that option. On the flip side, of course, you may be concerned about start-stop system reliability because there are a few more components involved that could break long-term, and some people dislike that overall feeling. So if you're looking for a vehicle without start-stop, then this is definitely the option in this segment to get. But again, there is going to be a little bit of a trade-off when it comes to fuel economy. Overall, the ES is exactly what you'd expect out of Lexus. It's quiet, it's confident, there's a little bit of a sporty edge there, but this is not going to feel quite as dynamic again as some of those alternatives. But in trade, the Lexus gives you a more comfortable cabin, a more plush ride, and definitely a more serene driving experience. So it really just depends on exactly what you're looking for in your luxury vehicle. The ES350 is never going to be the canyon carver that we see from some of the European luxury brands, but if you're looking for something that's definitely more comfortable, this is an excellent option. One of the hard to define things about the Lexus ES is, what does this compete with? At the beginning of the video, I said that it's always marched to a different drummer, and that is especially true as time has gone on with Lexus, because the direct competitor for Lexus to the BMW 3 Series and the Mercedes-Benz C-Class is the Lexus IS. It is priced about where the Lexus ES is priced. It is notably shorter, and it is rear-wheel drive. Now, if you want all-wheel drive, you can get that in the Lexus IS or the Lexus GS. And the GS is actually suspiciously the same size as the Lexus ES, but they're three very different vehicles. The ES is the vehicle for you if you want that extra interior room, or you want the very efficient hybrid system under the hood, and you're willing to give up some driving dynamics for that choice. Because this is not going to handle on the road like an IS or a GS. It's just not the same kind of vehicle. And that means that the most natural competition for the Lexus ES is the Lincoln MKZ, the Acura TLX, the Buick Regal, and perhaps the Kia Cadenza. Those are the four vehicles on the market in the US that are like what we're seeing here. A key differentiator between this and the Lincoln, the Acura, and the Buick is that we don't find all-wheel drive available in the ES, as I said before. In that way, this is actually quite like the Kia Cadenza. Now, that really does affect the handling dynamics of the alternatives, especially the Acura TLX, because the TLX actually can have a rear-wheel drive driving dynamic that makes it very different than the other entries in this segment. But even though you can't get a rear-wheel drive driving dynamic without wheel slip in the Lincoln or in the Buick, they still have a very different driving dynamic than the Lexus, and all-wheel drive does improve handling. Of course, depending on how you configure those alternatives, they may actually cost more than the front-wheel drive Lexus ES, so keep that in mind when you're doing those comparisons. At this point in time, we don't know how much the 2019 ES will cost. The current ES starts at $38,950. We expect this to come in right around $39,000 or so, maybe just a little bit above or perhaps a little bit below. That puts this definitely in the same price range as a BMW 330i, a C300, or an Audi A4. But again, about the same price range as a Lexus IS300, which starts at $38,210, actually a little bit lower than the current generation ES350. But it is notably higher than a Lincoln MKZ, an Acura TLX, a Buick Regal, or the Kia Cadenza. The Buick Regal is particularly inexpensive, starting just under $25,000. On the flip side, of course, we get more standard equipment in the Lexus ES than we get in any of those four competitors. We especially get that standard V6 engine, which we don't find in the Regal or in the Acura. In addition to that, the overall level of refinement that we find in the new ES is definitely higher than all of those options. The Kia Cadenza in its latest version is a good value alternative, but even it does fall below the new cabin that we find in this model. I think that the previous generation ES was towards the bottom of the pack in that relatively small segment, but this new ES has definitely turned over a new leaf, same thing that we saw in the current generation of the Lexus LS. Lexus is likely going to keep pricing relatively firm versus the 2018 model, so I expect all that extra equipment in this version to actually cost you about the same as a less equipped model for 2018. So the top-end model is probably still going to be right around that $60,000 mark, but you're going to get much more equipment on the inside. It also is a little bit faster. It's definitely more luxurious on the inside. It has a better ride, and of course we have that new adaptive damper package, which I really like. As usual, of course, you're going to have to wait until we can get our hands on one for a complete week for our usual battery of comparisons and pricing analyses, and that should happen sometime around October or September. You'll be able to buy this at dealer lots around September. Expect full production to happen sometime around October or November. So if you're looking for a particular option package, you may have to wait towards the end of the 2018 calendar year. Until then, definitely put the Lexus ES on your shopping list, and if you're shopping for an ES right now and can wait, I would actually say probably wait for the 2019 model unless you get a really good deal on that 2018. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't already done so, head over to facebook.com to see what we're driving this week. You can also click on over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel. I'll see you later.